Thanks, Pastor Mark, and it is so great to be here today. And I guess it's one of my favourite little topics. Actually, I would there is a little video bit fairly early on things, so we'll need the sound to be able to cut in on that one there. Sorry, I should have alerted that one just a little bit earlier. But if we can have the first slide up, we'll get ourselves started from there, and we'll have a little chance to be able to lead into that. It's just in a couple of slides. So folks, today I want to be having a look at the future of our children, and what topic would be more important than that for so many parents and for so many places all around the world. We see in so many places around the world where homes are just so disjointed. There are so many people around the world now that they've been displaced from their homes, from their communities, from the cultures that they've known. They've been shifted all around the place. And sometimes we think about how much of a hardship for so many people in other parts of the world, but we have to also recognise there's hardship in our parts of the world, and that's a truth. We'll have a look at a couple of things here today. There's a little picture there just to do with, it was actually down at Carricalinga, where, and again, we've got a kids camp coming up again in just a few weeks. So if anybody would like to register as a helper for the kids camp, we'll give a little bit of a prompt for that there today. They're a great opportunity and to spend time with our kids. And I guess we'd have to comment that if we fail of spending time with our kids, then they will fail, and then that would be our fault, wouldn't it? We've got to be so careful about all of those things. We are going to have a look at a little video, and I'd just sort of like to set a little bit of the, I guess, a little bit of the scene for the world's children. go away, but it's not going away. So we're interested to do with our children. And of course, whenever people talk about kids, we talk about where there's hopes and dreams and ambition. Is the kids, we want to set up a lot of happy times for them and so on, and so we do. And we've got opportunity to do that, so why wouldn't we do that? But the lot for so many children is not those things. The lot for so many children, there is actually hardship, there's actually desperation in their lives, and that daily. There are so many parents around the place feel so helpless about the lives of their kids. There's so many places around the world where people actually don't know if their kids are going to actually come home that day, or whether they're going to be separate. Actually, in Sue's family, excuse me, in Sue's family, her dad's family had the situation there over in Java in the Second World War, where the Japanese soldiers were coming in. And on one day, a lot of people were trying to go to the train station to move away, and there was a family that lived very close to them, and great friends. And they went to get on the train, and there was so much pushing and so much shoving and so on, that the one daughter, which was a friend of the family, got separated, and the parents just from out, they couldn't do anything about it. They called out the window, "Oh look, just bring her with you tomorrow." But on the morrow, the Japanese came in, and all of Sue's dad and his sisters and his parents and this other daughter got taken into an internment camp. And they got, for the next 4 years, were locked away. And we're at the time there where Sue's grandfather was then separated from his wife and the children. In process of time through all of that, and it's quite an interesting story, that Sue's dad, Raymond, he ended up being able to shift camps and ended up in the same camp with his dad. At the end of the war, there was still all sorts of uncertainty. People didn't know who had died, who'd survived, and so on it went. There's so many things to do with all of that. But I couldn't help always thinking about this young girl separated from her family, and them thinking, what's actually going to happen with her now? But there's a whole heap of situations around where there is hardship and there's absolute anguish in people's lives. You can find an abundance of images, and it's to do with whether there's just enough food for them, whether there's medicine for them, whether there's actually somewhere suitable to live, and all the sort of conditions of life. And you have to start to think, well, what is the future for those children? But we are going to concentrate about the future to do with our children. We don't actually have a whole heap of the same world problems, just to do with the natural environments and the wars and that sort of thing. But when we look around to do with what's happening with so many of our children, and we find that there's a lack of discipline around the place. Part of that is because people don't know what direction to give anymore, it seems. There's rebellion, there's all sorts of anger issues that are around the place. People being at liberty, I guess, to do all of those things, nobody ends up happier out of all of that. But rather we end up with increased episodes of violence in people's homes. We end up with increased episodes of anxiety in children's lives. We know that we can be sympathetic for the parents about their lot. There are so many things that have changed in our culture that people thought, oh, this would be a good way to go. And to a large degree, so many of the errors of our society have happened actually because people have pushed God and his principles out of their lives. I see it at school. I'm a high school teacher, and we see so often about where parents come in for some conversation we have to do with their child. And I've seen it before where they're sitting there, and after the interview, the parent is scared to go home because we've given a bit of direction about how things ought to be. And you think, what an unhappy situation. There are actually so many kids in our society where they go home from school and perhaps they go 1 week to mum and 1 week to dad. Now, we know there's some circumstances in life where people have lost their husband or their wife in whatever that circumstance may be. And those poor people then have got all sorts of responsibility added upon them. And it's actually a terrible situation for people to have to be coping with. But you end up with a whole heap of kids that go home from school to loneliness. They go home from school and they don't have friends around all the time, and they don't get invited to visit places. They don't have a connection with community as we have brought our kids in, and we've got a connection with community. And it's such a wonderful thing that we're into. Now, all of these displays, and then people feel really, really helpless. Well, what do I do then about disciplining my child for their well-being, for their ultimate happiness? What do I do with the rebellious child, the ones who are going to take and say, and turn to their own parents and say, I actually know the law and you can't tell me what to do? Nobody actually ends up in a happy situation out of those things. And the permission to be angry. And the kids see it displayed in their parents. That's for sure. It's actually a terrible situation. There are so many kids, and actually we get the thing with the parents who come into the school, and we're trying to teach them. Your child actually has to learn to take a bit of responsibility for their own actions. And the response that so often comes back, I just want my child to be happy. Now, I sometimes have to explain to people that happiness is not a standalone thing. You can't turn around and give a package of happy to somebody. You actually can't do that. It doesn't exist. And say, well, how can I make them happy? They're actually angry all the time. They won't do what I say. There's this and there's that and there's so on. And there are so many parents then, they actually become very, very protective to the point of being perhaps overprotective of their kids, to the point that their kids actually never learn anything new. Now, there's a recipe for being unhappy. If you want people to be happy, as I said, happiness doesn't sort of stand on its own 2 feet. Happiness actually comes along as a result of all sorts of other things in a person's life. Now, a person who feels secure in their life has got a chance to also be happy. I'll go through some of the things, though, that the children need if they're going to be happy. Now, a lot of parents don't pick up on these things. They think that if we can just keep things quiet, if we can just keep things peaceful, and you end up with parents as servants to their children. And in that situation, you actually don't generate happiness at all. For a child to be happy, and I can describe some children who are happy, there are children who have actually had to go through a bit, and they've actually learnt a bit of resilience by their experience. That means they're actually able to bounce back when something happens to them. Now, some parents are so overprotective that their kids, whatever happens, they actually become a victim. And they don't get then coached into, oh, well, how do you actually cope with all these things? Because people who learn how to cope with things, they then got a chance of being happy people. Children that end up with some drive, a little bit of work ethic, if they're willing to work hard, then they actually accomplish things and they actually end up happy because of that. They feel a little bit content in themselves and a bit fulfilled, and they start to get the idea, wow, the things that I work at, I can actually improve my own life. I can take care of that. For people to be accountable for their own decisions. Goodness me, in schools, I guess if I sort of compare to my own experience at school, if I ever got into trouble at school, I would never talk about that at home. I would never talk about that at home because I would end up in so much trouble. These days in schools, if somebody gets told off, there's quite often you have a parent come in and wants to have a piece of you because you told their child off. And you turn around and you say, well, actually, I'll tell you the whole story though, They might not have actually told you everything that went on. And a lot of parents, in trying to sort of keep a friendship, I guess, with their children, they don't actually want to hear the whole story. They want to use this as a little opportunity to get in the good books with their own kid, because they haven't always been in the good books. And then you get the child who's actually maybe acted up so badly, been so rude to so many people, and then they won't take any direction. And then you find that you have to speak just a little more sternly to them. Now, it used to be that if I spoke more sternly to one of the students, that, oh, I'm stepping over the line, sorry sir, I won't do that anymore. If I now speak a little bit more sternly, for some students, this is not for all of them, you know, it's not the rule now, but there's so much more of it, where the child then will almost break into tears in front of their parent and say, well, but they didn't have to yell at me. And you actually don't know what it's like when I yell yet. I don't know if you want to find out. When people have commitment to something themselves, when they work through their problems, when they actually understand that there is actually a purpose to their life as well, but also when they have lots of connections with other people, when they have lots of activity and a regular time with other people that have got similar values. That puts people in a secure position. When they're taught about being honest and open and things of good character. Also, when they're actually able to be optimistic about their future. The sort of conversations that happens in people's homes that give some optimism. Oh, well, we'll keep working that and it's going to be okay. And we'll work at all of these things. There are so many people that don't have optimism because every experience in their life has actually been one where it doesn't matter what happens, I'm going to fail. That's a terrible position to be in. When people have learned skills, I'm talking about the physical skills, so there's physical skills and they're important. In fact, our job as parents is to bring our children to maturity. That's our job. And to bring them to maturity, there's actually a whole heap of aspects of that. There is physical maturity, of course. You know, children that actually never go out to actually like compete a little bit physically in something, a little bit of, you know, healthy sports competition or whatever, and then find there's so many just sort of happy occasions they can't really join in on because they don't have the skills. That's actually a terrible situation. Never to be picked on the team. You know, that's actually just a terrible thing. So there's a physical maturity that we've got to bring people to. There's an emotional maturity. There is intellectual maturity. You actually have to keep working at the studies and work at the things so you actually sort of develop the skills. There might be that people pick up other skills in their life to do with music, to do with all sorts of other hobbies and so on. An opportunity to be creative and all those things. So there's all those maturities, but there's also a thing that we add in life is a spiritual maturity. And to be able to get to that, you actually have to have opportunity. You have to have some immersion in some spiritual things so you can actually work those things out for yourself. I just want my kids to be happy. It doesn't stand alone. When they are trained up, when they've learnt some things, when they have some accomplishments, when they've got something to contribute to other people, they'll actually be happy in doing those things. The joy of service. Actually, a lot of people, they sort of think, I wish I was just a kid again. I wish I was a kid again, where everyone would be proud of me for just taking a long nap. What a good boy, you know, that sort of thing. This fellow's a very interesting one. It's actually one of my favourite quotes to use in some of the parent-teacher nights that we have. This fellow, Frederick Douglass, he lived in the 1800s. He was born into slavery. Everything was actually against him. When he grew up, and he then actually became known for some of his speeches. At that time in history, a lot of people thought that the people that are brought up in slavery the Negro Americans, they actually did not have the intellectual capacity to be able to contribute the same as the other people. They thought that that was the case. When you look in the descriptions to do with Frederick, it says he was described by the abolitionists, and some people would know about that at the time, as being a counterexample to slaveholders' arguments that slaves lacked the intellectual capacity to function as independent Americans. And that was the way that he was treated when he was brought up. But then they found that he is such a good orator, and they recorded some of the things that he said. And this is one, I reckon, one of the best quotes ever. He said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Now, there's a whole heap of people that have not spent the time to build strong children. And then later on, they have all the regrets about, they've got no purpose in their life, they're not accomplishing anything, they're making so many wrong choices along the way. Well, part of that is, and it might be because it's not just the home, it's the whole society around about. We can be so, I'll use the word protective of children, that they don't get the chance to learn the things that they actually need of. And so the scriptures actually tell us instructions to do with bringing up children. And the scriptures, of course, have got instructions for us as adults, wives and husbands, people sort of running families about how we ought to do those things. If we do it well, and we actually build strong children, they've got a fighting chance, haven't they? Then they do have that chance. Sorry about the front size. You might be able to see that all there. The scriptures actually tell us we've got to train up a child in the way they should go. It doesn't happen just by a simple immersion. You've actually got to use teaching opportunities to be able to say, this is actually important, and sometimes to sit our children down and say, look, I actually, it's in the past now, I did tell you off for that, and I'm going to tell you why I did. And very often when you go and you do that, as long as the kids are old enough to handle that, afterwards they sit down and they say, yes, I know. And they actually do know. If things have been modelled well for them, they know what's actually right and what's wrong. As soon as we work from a position that, you can decide for yourself what's right and wrong, oh, goodness me. That's like putting people back in the Garden of Eden and saying, look around and see what you'd like to eat. We don't want to be doing that. So the big question about, what actually does happen in our homes? So in some homes, there'll be an image where there'll be some study, there'll be family time together, and maybe talking about important things together. Maybe all sorts of planning about what we're going to do as a family, and about the things that are right and the things that are wrong. It typically falls as often to the mother in the family to be the one that teaches the morals to the kids. Now, it might be a little bit like my mum. Part of the morals were that if you do it wrong, boy, you'll get it for that, That'll be the case. A lot of people now don't sort of deal with things just in the same way. Some of we get some great statements from our mum. You do that again and I'll knock you into the middle of next week. Now, a number of people, that used to be sort of a common thing that mothers said to their children. These days, if a mother said that to their child, you might find the next day they're actually sort of relaying that to the school counsellor, and the school counsellor is going to call you in, I think we need to have a chat about this, It doesn't matter what the behaviour of the kid may have been. So what actually happens in our homes, and those things are all the happy ones, but in so many homes, there's a yelling in the background, there's isolation. There's actually a whole heap of kids go home and there's nobody home. Actually, that was actually the typical thing when I went home when I was a kid. Mum was home. That was just the case. That's not always possible these days. We know that is also really, really difficult for people. And it's actually made things really, really awkward. In fact, it was actually a really uncomfortable thing. If we went home, I went inside, there's nobody here. Now, that was a great opportunity, of course, to start sort of raiding the cupboards and finding where the chocolate biscuits were, if there were any chocolate biscuits and that sort of thing. But it was actually the most common thing was that there was somebody at home. So that was the place of security. So who's actually teaching our kids? There's so many people. Actually, there's just about everything that comes up where there's a problem in society, and it'll come up on the news. Oh, why aren't they teaching that at school? Hang on. Why aren't they teaching that at home? That's actually, when things are taught well at home, it's actually really easy at school as well. When things are not taught well at home, things are always difficult. The other thing that is happening through the media, through our society generally, things are seeing and having things done earlier and earlier, as somebody commented, shouldn't even be done later. I actually found it really an affront. Actually, when Gail started school, I happened to get home one day early enough to go and pick her up. I might have been kindy. And I went in there, and there's this little kid there, and along the corridor, the classes hadn't finished, and this mother yelling at her child and using all sorts of language that, in my upbringing, it was sort of a little bit like, I don't know what it was like for some of the other older people when they were younger. Bad language in the home was actually really, really rare. My dad was one of those that, bad language and swear words, they might have happened at work, but they don't happen around women and children. Now, it's the women and children that take over, and it gets modelled everywhere. There's no holds anymore. There used to be some words that were, the specially bad swear words that people used on the most extreme occasions. Do you know, actually, there are no words left to use on the most extreme occasions anymore because they're just used all the time. You might be reassured to know that in our school, and in quite a lot of them, if the children are using the inappropriate words, we actually still do give consequences for that. The confusion is there's no consequences at home. That's a terrible thing. Abraham. He was a wonderful chap, and we find there that God made great promises to him. And God had a huge respect for Abraham. And one of the reasons was this: because I know him, that he'll command his children. And he'll command his household after him, that they might keep the way of the Lord. So God says, I'll put a tick next to that, and that's a good example for each and every one of us as well. He'll teach his children. Well, what's he going to teach them? Be good under these circumstances. No, I'm going to teach them the way of the Lord. Because if we actually learn the way of the Lord, then we will be good under all circumstances. But for us, we're living in the realm of what the Bible talks about, the perilous times and the ones that we are in. Do you know, when you hear the policemen that go out into the street and they get sworn at by 5-year-old little girls, and the parents allow that to happen, and you think, how bad is that? What sort of future is that child going to have if there's actually no correction? If nobody's actually able to be a policeman in their life, that means they actually can't be protected either from all sorts of things. And the people are learning and practicing behaviours that afterwards somehow they want to be protected from. We get that happen at school as well. Every now and again, and again, and again, and again, We get parents who get in contact because their child is being bullied online. Now, there's so much of that goes on. Now, sometimes we actually get access to other information that comes in from different places. And the number of times we've sat down, we've got this very, very indignant mother that's come in about her child, about this other child is sort of treating them badly and saying these bad things online, and so other friends are all hearing it and so on. And we deal with all of that and we listen patiently, and then we say, well, actually, you might need to know a little bit more of the story. We've actually got here, this is actually some images of the interaction between this other child and yours. And when they read through and they find that all the things that their child is accusing the other one of, they've actually been at least as guilty themselves with the language and everything else. And so, of course, the result of that is mum backs down and turns around and tells their kid off. No, they don't. They actually still try to find a way to defend their own child. What a confusion that is for their child. That actually I'm going to defend you no matter how wrong you are. Perilous times we're in. And the Bible talks about it in 2 Timothy, in the last days, in our days, perilous times are going to come, and we get images of what does that all look like. And it tells that there's going to be unthankful and unholy, without natural affection, fierce, so much of that around. Truth break, no self-control. And that's what we find in so much of our society. Praise the Lord, we don't find so much of that in the church. There might be instances, there might be teaching moments that we have to use for some of our young people, and maybe some of our older people in the church as well. But this isn't the typical. But for a whole heap of people, that's their whole life. They can actually summarise just about their daily interactions with people. That's actually what they get. Disobedient to parents, all those things that are on there. It goes on to say in another version about unloving and unforgiving and slanderers and no self-control, to the point of being brutal. A little quote there down the bottom. In these days, in every school, this is actually from some little time ago though, in every school there are emotionally disturbed or behaviour disordered kids who are in need of specialist help. And a whole heap of your kids going to school, that's actually what they see happening each day. They actually see the rebellion, they see the anger. They've got to sort of back away, or they've got to sort of get involved in it themselves. That's a terrible, and that won't help their future, won't make them happy. We're taught to be lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. That's our whole society. And a whole heap is, even for those that have got, I guess, some sort of religion or some sort of standards in their life. Having some sort of form of religion, ceremonial things, but no power of God in their life. And so they might keep hoping, they might keep trying, but they don't get the backup that they need. You won't be able to read that very well. When you have a look and see, well, what do our kids need for the future? And you look at the United Nations Organisation for the Care of Children and so on. So as adults, we realise the real future lies in the hands of our children and grandchildren. Well, that's where the future is, I guess. Our first priority should be the nurturing and education of our youth. Oh, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But then when you ask, well, what sort of education do we want? Well, what we want to do, educate them in, is make sure they have a good diet and get enough exercise. Because if they do that, we will save them. Actually, the real concern over there in America is that the parents are going to live longer than the children, just because of the lifestyle that's been adopted there. They've got the rising cases of the diabetes, the cancer and the heart disease, and these are all really natural concerns. The other things that people are concerned about for the kids, they say if you want to teach them anything, teach them these things. Teach them about the climate. I'm sure they all understand that. I'm sure that all the kids, when they go home on a hot day, say, no, Mum, don't turn on the air conditioner because we might actually make a bit more pollution. Don't do that. No, don't drive me, I'll walk. Or I'll ride my push bike or something or other else like that. It's sort of like they say, if we educate our children, then they'll have a future. I don't know that it's going to happen. The climate emergency. But the other thing they are concerned about as well, and the terminology there is that the predatory commercial exploitation that is encouraging harmful and addictive activities. And no one's willing to stop it. They're at the moment sort of saying, oh, goodness me, there's all those gambling ads on TV. And they've seen the things that have happened to adults and how it's destroyed some lives and families and so on. And then they've started to see, goodness me, the kids are tapping into this and they're consumed with it. There's other places around the world, they've actually tried to come up with some natural helps for things. If you go and you get to somewhere like New Zealand, they're going to try to make it so as that the next generation will not smoke cigarettes. Anything, a pat on the back. But what about all of the other attitudinal things that we had on the slide before? What about all of those? They're not coming up with any way to educate in those things. Well, if we want a future for our kids, actually there's a lot that does depend on us. There's a heap that depends on us. Way back in the Old Testament, there was a warning that if you don't take care of your children correctly, your kids and your grandkids are going to have a really rough go of it all. The way that it's put there is visiting the iniquity, the lawlessness, the lack of self-control, the selfishnesses, and all those things, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, under the third and the fourth generation. We actually see it in our society in a number of areas where people might be third and fourth generation unemployed people. And it does harm to them. That's not the kids' fault at that point. It's actually what's led into that from their parents and their grandparents and so on. And they're stuck in a cycle. We actually have some people in our assembly that got freed from that cycle, don't we? Actually, when we think to do with Barbara and Rose, and actually their cousin came to the meeting the play last night, and she loved it. And the thing that she loved, when she was asked at the end, what did you actually like best about the play? She said the things that he said at the end. So Pastor Mark was there talking about a comparison between the world at the time of Noah and the world that's now, and she was able to relate, that's my world. This is relevant. She was a victim of a history that hasn't helped. And then she has a look and she sees Barbara and Rose and about their life now and how secure they feel. And it's like, that's exactly what I'm after. That's what we want. For Barbara and Rose, for people who actually do know more of their history, I always thought that actually to a large degree, and I would have excused them for the things that happened in their life, they should have been damaged beyond repair, is the way that I put it. And the Lord saved them from that. It's the Lord's principles in their life that they now spend their time teaching their children. And goodness me, for anybody who actually gets to go and meet Barbara and Rose and the families and so on, and didn't know anything about the background, They might imagine, they just sort of come from a happy, stable and caring place and had every advantage in life and so on. That wasn't the case at all. But the Lord changed that. And that's where the future is. A lot depends on us to make sure we're doing it right. But a whole heap depends on them as well. As much as we've got to teach, and it becomes, as the kids get older, it's their responsibility to learn. The scriptures tell us there back in Deuteronomy about you've got to teach the things diligently to your children. It might be hard work teaching some things to your children because we might have to take on some of the same lessons ourselves personally. Teach them diligently to your children and talk about them. When you sit down and when you walk by the way and when you lie down or when you rise up. And there are so many kids have never had a conversation about God in their life. Actually, when I was a kid, when I was about, and I can't remember the age now, I was 9 or 10 years old, Mum and Dad were going to take us all off to get christened. And my older sister had been christened when she was a baby, and then there was myself and my brother and 2 other sisters came along. We never spoke about God in our house at all. And all of a sudden they're going to take us along to get christened. So I thought, I'll do the right thing. I'll show a bit of an interest. So Mum, why are we doing that? You just behave yourself. I wanted to ask further. Each of us were going to have 3 godparents. I thought, what's a godparent? I thought, none of them have ever talked to me about God. They're going to become a godparent. What's that all about? But the answer was, you just behave yourself. Anyway. We're told to be careful, even for those of us that have been in the Lord, to be careful lest we forget the things that our eyes have seen and then they depart from our heart. But teach them to your children and to your grandchildren. Make it part of your life pattern. Down the bottom it says, gather me the people together and I'll make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children. There's a whole heap of places in the scriptures where the Lord focuses, teach your kids. If you've got that manner that you will teach your kids, you will learn yourself, that the generation to come might know them, even the children that should be born, who should arise and declare it to their children. That's actually a measure of have we taught it well. If we've taught it to our kids, and then we find them teaching that to somebody else. Ooh, there's a little tick box there. Now, not everybody has all of that, but we try to find opportunity. So it gets highlighted here in Joel chapter 1. So tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. Unless people are in a situation like we have, how can they possibly accomplish that? So that's why we've got to keep bringing people in, isn't it? We're actually told, just a little fun on this one here, about teaching our children. For some homes, it's my way or the highway. If you're not going to do it, you're under my roof, it's going to be like this. Well, the Bible doesn't instruct us to sort of do things that way. It says, you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. So there's teaching and there's discipline and the various things in that way. In the Amplified, it says, don't provoke your children to anger. It says, don't exacerbate them to the point of resentment with demands that are trivial or unreasonable or humiliating. That's been the experience for some kids, or abusive, nor by showing favouritism or indifference to any of them, but bring them up tenderly with loving kindness and the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Now, I like another little version on this one, and this is the Hawaiian Pidgin version. As it says, same for you father guys. That's the fathers, of course. For you father guys, no hassle your kids for them become hoo-hoo. And hoo-hoo is all those things up over here. My better teach them right and show them everything the one in charge like them for know and for do. The things that God wants them to know, you let them know those things. Franklin Roosevelt said, we may not be able to prepare the future for our children, but we can at least prepare our children for the future. The Bible actually tells us what's going to happen in this life. It actually doesn't make any apologies, and God doesn't say, I'm going to sort of stop you from seeing all of these things. Know it's coming, get ready for it all. In our homes, now we know there's a lot of people trying to bring up kids all by themselves, but there's others where there are parents together, which is more ideal where it's possible, of course. The most important thing that a father can do for his children is to love their mother. If he does that well, they learn a heap just straight off from it. Somebody made the quote that says, in the happiest of our childhood memories, our parents were happy too. And sometimes we as parents, we have to work a little bit harder at it, don't we? And put away some things that don't help. Again, maybe a little bit smaller. I guess a little instruction for each and every one of us. We actually are connected with a great community. And the Bible commends that. The church was God's good idea to go and make us in a place where we're able to be secure. We're told, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Our children will lose their way. Don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. Bring them along, immerse our kids in it. If there's other people's kids, you come along to the assembly, you're a grandparent type, or you're an uncle or an auntie. It's not about whether it's your direct kids or grandkids. It's all the kids that you have access to, that you do what you're able to do. Get to know them, be friends with them, let them know that they're in a really, really good place. So the Lord says, look, I've got some plans for you. We're nearly finished here. He wants to prosper us and give us hope and a future. There's so many people that live their life these days and they don't feel that it's like that for them at all. We need to surround our children with good examples. As it says, we train up the children the way they should go. And when they're old, they won't depart from it. It locks in those things. Good examples, surround our children with the Lord. If we surround our children with the Lord, and in one little presentation, we can't say everything about how to do all of that. We're encouraged to actually know what the Word of God says. The principles for each and every one of us. Oh, this is what we're supposed to do. This is what we're supposed to teach them to do. And if we do that, they end up connected. And we're really encouraged with the teaching that our kids have had. In fact, after this meeting, I'll be actually going back to our other meeting because young Natalie Bloomfield wants me to baptise her today. So her parents have taught her. She's been brought. Actually, it's not only the parents are teaching her, actually all of her friends have been teaching her as well. During this year, there's been about 7 of the kids, that same sort of age group, that have all encouraged each other. They've gone in the prayer room, they've prayed with each other, they've received the Holy Spirit, they've spoken in tongues, they've been baptised, and now they're praying at home with their parents and just rejoicing in the Lord. And we think, what a good thing that is. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think I've held you for long enough. So thank you very much.